Crafters Library. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create this Vintage Journey card featuring products from the Pink Paisley Vintage Vogue collection. At the end of this video, I'm going to tell you how you can enter to win the Pink Paisley Vintage Vogue prize pack. So let's get started. You're going to need a piece of Concord Crush cardstock from Stampin' Up! That measures 1.5 by 4 1/4. You're then going to need Stampin' Up!'s scallop trim border punch, and you're going to scallop along one of the 4 1/4 inch sides. So insert that into the punch until you feel the guide and punch along one of the sides. Once you're done, you can set aside your punch and clean off your work area. Now you're going to need a piece of designer paper that measures 2.5 by 4 1/4, and I'm using the Vintage Vogue collection from Pink Paisley. I'm going to stick my designer paper to the top of my Concord Crush cardstock, leaving just the scallop exposed with my double-sided adhesive. So like I said, I am just leaving the scallop on the Concord Crush cardstock exposed on the outer edge of my designer paper. Now you're going to need a 6-inch piece of the Victoria 5/8 of an inch crochet trim from Stampin' Up! You're going to lay that just along the edge of your designer paper before the scallop. You're going to wrap the ends around to the back of the designer paper and cardstock and stick those down using some double-sided adhesive. So now we're going to need a piece of Blushing Bride cardstock that measures 4 1/4 by 11 inches. I've scored it at 5 1/2 so that I will have a proper card base. You can set aside your designer paper with your scallop on it for a moment, as well as your double-sided adhesive. You're going to now stamp your greeting, and I'm stamping this before I fold it and before I emboss it, because I found that when I stamp a greeting or I want to add texture to my cardstock, that my greeting won't always stamp properly. So a tip for stamping and embossing, dry embossing, would be to stamp your greeting and then add your embossing to your cardstock. So I'm going to stamp the word journey to my card, and that's going to be my greeting, and that is found in the travel stamp set from 7 Gypsies. I'm also going to stamp that using the jet black archival ink from Ranger. So just ink up your image or your greeting here, and I'm going to stamp it in the bottom right hand corner. So once your greeting has your ink on it, go ahead and stamp that onto the cardstock. You can set aside your stamp as well as your ink. And we're now going to emboss this. And I'm going to dry emboss this using an embossing folder and my Big Shot. And the embossing folder that I'm going to use is this beautiful flourish found from Cuttlebug. I'm not sure of the actual name of it, but it's a very detailed vintage type of embossing folder. And I found while I was working that if your greeting wasn't quite dry, or your ink wasn't quite dry, that it did leave some remnant of the ink on my embossing folder. So before I emboss that, I want to just give it a blast from my heat tool, setting my ink onto my cardstock so that it will not transfer onto my embossing folder when I run it through the Big Shot. So this is just setting the ink with that heat. So now that my greeting is dry, I'm going to insert this into my embossing folder, and I know that my embossing folder will not emboss the full card and it will give me edges because I have a standard size card. My embossing folder is not quite a 4 1/4 inch embossing folder with the image there. So I only need the far right hand side embossed. So all I'm going to do is run that section through the Big Shot. So I'm inserting my cardstock, the right hand side of the front of my card base, put that in, sandwiched in between my folder here, and I'm going to run this through my Big Shot. So as you can see, I'm back from the Big Shot and I have embossed, using my embossing folder, just the side of my cardstock here, and my greeting still shows through perfectly because I did stamp that before embossing. So when you add the texture to it, you still have your greeting as long as it's stamped in a fairly bold color, that the texture won't lose the effect of the greeting. So now you can take and fold this in half, creating your card base, creasing along that score line that you have with your bone folder. Our next step is to bring in a flourish, and I'm going to use a rhinestone flourish, and this is from Ziva Creations, and the number of the rhinestone will be in the handout, and I'm just laying this onto my greeting, or onto the card front. Then I'm going to take my piece of designer paper that's scalloped, and I'm going to align that with the outer edge there, and I'm just going to position my rhinestone flourish where I want it. And I'm noting that this is where my scallop ends, so I'm going to come back and trim part of my scallop flourish off using my paper snips. And the reason I'm doing this is because my designer paper won't totally stick to my flourish, so I just want to remove part of that, and this is the easiest way to do it, is to find out where it's going to sit and then trim off the excess that you don't need. And I would save this because this could be used in another project. So again, just come in, find your positioning for your flourish, make sure that the scallop will cover the end of that. And then stick this to your card front. So I'm just going to peel this off, and I'm keeping my scalloped piece of designer paper on hand because I want to make sure that I have proper placement once I have this down. If you position these type of flourishes lightly onto your project, you can still reposition them while you're working before you press that into place. This apart. And place this onto my card front. And you just want to make sure that the flourish lays flat. It will stick to the raised section of your embossing. So just take, if you've got proper placement there, I find that I want to move that slightly still, coming a little closer to the edge of my cardstock, so I can just lift this up and bring it out a little bit farther. So just keep working with your flourish until you're completely satisfied with its placement. And once you are, make sure that you press that into place. So now that you have your flourish in place, you're now ready to add your designer paper that's scalloped with your ribbon attached to it. And I'm going to use some liquid adhesive because I do have some dimension because of my rhinestones, as well as the dimension from my embossed cardstock. I want to use a liquid adhesive to cover the back of my designer paper and my scalloped edge, and I'm doing so because the liquid adhesive will adhere the cardstock and designer paper a little better to the dimension. You could use some red liner tape if that works better for you. I'm just using some Tombow liquid adhesive to complete this. So all I want to do is I want to align my left hand side of my designer paper with the outer edge as well as the top and bottom edges of my cardstock and stick that down to the card. And all you want to do is when you're working over top of the edges of your rhinestones here, is to press that into place. You do want to give this a few minutes to dry because it is a liquid adhesive. You don't want it to move. So you might want to leave this for a few minutes and then come back to your project. So now that my adhesive is dry, I'm ready to start embellishing the card front. I've created this crinkled dyed seam biting triple bow, and you can view a video on how I did that in the Paper Crafters library. That is an added feature in our library. I'm showing you how I created this card, but our members at the Paper Crafters library will have the creation of this bow as well as how I dyed the seam binding. If you are not a member of the Paper Crafters library, you can use any type of light ribbon or a bow to create this type of bow as well. I just used a Bow Easy to create a 3-looped bow, and I dyed a lightweight ribbon. So now you're going to embellish the center of this ribbon that I've already created, or the bow that I've already created, using the buttons from the Vintage Vogue collection. And I'm using this rhinestone bow button. I find it absolutely beautiful and think that it would work very well with my rhinestones that I've already added to my card. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to use hot glue and stick that to the center of my bow. So just add a dot of hot glue to the center of that button and then stick that to the center of the bow. And hot glue dries fairly quickly, so this won't be a problem, but I would just hold it in place for a minute just to have that glue set. Once you have that done, you're going to then take some hot glue and stick it to the back of your bow, and then stick that to the card directly onto the designer paper here, about 1.5 inches down from the top. And I have this on a slight downward angle towards the left hand side. I'm not cutting off my tails at this point yet because I have to add a few extra embellishments before I trim that off. And my extra embellishments are these vintage trinket flowers from Maya Road, and I'm just going to take 3 of those flowers. These are beautiful vanilla color, and I'm just going to trim off my wires using your snips or your rubber scissors or paper or metal cutters if you have them. So just trim those off, and I always leave a slight tail on the wire just so that my flower doesn't fall apart. So you can just bend that over, throw away your wire ends here. And then I'm going to hot glue those now to my card over top of my bow. I'm going to add 1 to the top of the bow, so just add a dot of hot glue. And I'm going to put that towards the top left-hand side of my created dyed bow there. I'm going to take my second small rose or paper flower, and I'm going to stick this in between the tails with some hot glue. And my third one is going to go towards my crocheted trim, again using a small dot of hot glue. So now that you have those clustered, I am going to trim off the tails of my dyed and crinkled seam binding here. So I'm going to leave them still fairly long, and then you can play with them to get them to have proper positioning. And because I know I want this to somewhat stand like that, I'm going to stick the tails of my ribbon down with a mini glue dot so that it sits exactly where I want it to. So I'm just going to place a mini glue dot on the bottom of the tail, and I want that to slightly stand up. Oops. Like so. And I'm going to leave the right hand tail hanging off to the side. You could always add a little mini glue dot there to hold it off if it's covering any part of your card that you don't wish. Actually, maybe I'll do that. I'll just add that in there and put it towards my seam binding, still crinkling that like that. My last embellishment is to take 2 of Maya Rhodes trinket pins, and these are beautiful small crystals at the end of each pin, and I'm going to stick those in behind my bow. And I like to add just a small dot of hot glue to the bottom of each pin so that I can tuck that in and it will stick properly where I want it placed. So I'm just going to slide the pin in behind my bow like so. Take my second one, add a small dot of hot glue on the bottom, and I'm keeping this a little taller than my first and on a different angle. And there you have your finished Vintage Journey card. I hope you enjoyed stamping with me. So let's take a look at this week's Freebie Friday prize pack. As part of the collection pack, you'll receive 6 double-sided pattern papers. As well, we have included the Vintage Vogue coordinating buttons. So all you have to do to enter to win this prize pack is to visit the Paper Crafters Library blog. Enter a comment in the post you see here. If you're watching this video from somewhere other than our blog, you'll find a direct link to this post in the video description section. While you're there, I invite you to check out our video library by clicking on the video library link at the top of our blog. Whether you're a beginner looking to learn the basics or an advanced paper crafter looking to learn new skills and techniques, you'll find it all here. Stamping, card making, scrapbooking, and altered art. We cover it all. With over 700 videos currently in our library and new videos added almost daily, we are the largest and most comprehensive online library of video tutorials for paper crafters on the internet. We invite you to visit our library and see what we're all about. The winner for this week's giveaway will be announced on our blog on Friday, March 16th. See you on the blog.